Hey everyone, using a throwaway because I have work colleagues who follow my main account and I prefer keeping personal stuff private. I'm still shaking as I write this, but I need to know if I handled this situation right. I never imagined I would find myself physically blocking my own mother from climbing the stairs in my house, but here we are. My name is Sarah, and at 29 years old, I thought I had figured out how to handle family drama. Boy, was I wrong. Let me paint you a picture of what our life has looked like for the past 3 weeks. My husband Jake and I have been married for 5 wonderful years. We're both 29, and I'm currently 6 months pregnant with our first child. Under normal circumstances, Jake is the most supportive partner I could ask for. He helps with dishes, takes care of the yard work, and has been absolutely amazing throughout my pregnancy, constantly checking if I need anything and making sure I'm comfortable. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed overnight. Jake works for a major tech company, and something went catastrophically wrong in one of their departments. I don't pretend to understand all the technical details, but what I do know is that someone made a massive mistake that put the entire company at risk of losing $50 million. Yes, you read that right, $50 million. The worst part? It wasn't even Jake's department that caused the problem, but his team was the only one skilled enough to fix it. What followed was the most grueling 3 weeks of our marriage. Jake started working 18-hour days, sometimes not even coming home at all. There were nights when I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning to find him stumbling through the front door, looking like he had been hit by a truck. His usually bright eyes were bloodshot and surrounded by dark circles that seemed to get deeper each day. His shoulders, normally straight and confident, were permanently hunched from exhaustion and stress. I watched my strong, capable husband transform into someone I barely recognized. He would come home, mechanically eat whatever dinner I had kept warm for him, take a quick shower, and collapse into bed fully clothed more often than not. Some nights I would go downstairs to check on him because he hadn't come to bed, only to find him literally asleep at the kitchen table, his face planted in his dinner plate. Other times, I discovered him passed out on the bathroom floor, still in his work clothes, with the shower running because he had been too exhausted to even undress. It broke my heart to see him like this, but I knew he was doing it for our family's future. His job provides our health insurance, and with a baby coming, we couldn't afford for him to lose it. So I did everything I could to support him from home. I took over all the household chores, made sure he had clean clothes ready each morning, and tried to create a peaceful environment for the few hours he was actually home. The stress was taking a toll on me too, especially being 6 months pregnant. I worried constantly about Jake's health and whether he was pushing himself too hard. But I also felt proud of his dedication and determination. He never complained, never took his frustration out on me, and always managed to give me a tired smile and ask how I was feeling before collapsing into bed. Then, 2 nights ago, everything changed. I was lying in bed around midnight, which had become early by Jake's recent standards, when I heard his key in the lock. I immediately sat up, worried that something terrible had happened because he was home so much earlier than usual. When he walked into our bedroom, he looked absolutely dreadful, pale as a ghost, swaying slightly on his feet, dark circles under his eyes that looked almost purple in the dim light. But then something magical happened. Through all that exhaustion, his face broke into the biggest, most beautiful smile I had seen in 3 weeks. "We did it," he whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion but filled with relief. "It's over. Everything is fixed." I started crying right there in bed, not from sadness but from pure relief. Jake explained that his boss was so grateful for the team's hard work that he had given them each several days off to recover. Jake didn't have to be back in the office until the following Tuesday, which meant he had 5 whole days to rest and recuperate. He ate his dinner that night with more enthusiasm than I had seen in weeks, took a proper shower, and climbed into bed beside me. Within minutes, he was fast asleep, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I heard him breathing deeply and peacefully instead of the fitful, restless sleep that had become his norm. The next morning, I woke up around 9 o'clock feeling more rested than I had in weeks. Jake was still sleeping soundly beside me, and I couldn't bring myself to disturb him. I quietly slipped out of bed, went downstairs, and made myself breakfast. I even prepared ingredients for a special lunch to celebrate Jake's return to normal life whenever he decided to wake up. Around noon, I was enjoying a cup of herbal tea and reading a pregnancy book when I heard a car pull into our driveway. Looking out the window, I saw my parents' familiar blue sedan. My heart sank a little because I knew how my mother could be about proper schedules and what she considered appropriate behavior for married couples. My parents, Linda and Robert, are good people who love Jake and me dearly. But my mother has very strong opinions about how households should be run, and she's never been shy about sharing those opinions. She grew up in a generation where men worked traditional hours and came home for dinner every night, and she sometimes struggles to understand how different modern work life can be. I greeted them at the door with hugs and led them to the kitchen, where we sat down for coffee and catching up. My mother immediately noticed that it was quieter than usual in the house. "Where's Jake?" she asked, glancing around as if he might appear from another room. "He's still sleeping," I replied, keeping my voice light and cheerful. My mother's eyebrows shot up, and she exchanged a look with my father that I recognized all too well. It was the look that meant she was about to launch into one of her lectures about proper behavior and responsibility. "Sarah, it's past noon," she said, her voice taking on that tone that had made me feel guilty about everything from messy rooms to forgotten homework when I was a child. "It's completely unacceptable for a grown man to be sleeping this late, especially when he has a pregnant wife to take care of." I felt my stomach tighten, and it wasn't from the baby kicking. I had hoped to avoid this exact conversation, but I should have known better. My mother has always had strong opinions about what she calls proper behavior, and sleeping past what she considers a reasonable hour has always been high on her list of unacceptable activities. "Mom, you don't understand the situation," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and patient. "Jake has been through an incredibly difficult time at work. He deserves to rest." My father, who usually stays quiet during these family discussions, leaned forward slightly. "Sarah, your mother has a point. A man has responsibilities, especially to his pregnant wife. What if you needed him for something? What if there was an emergency?" I could feel the frustration building in my chest, but I tried to explain the situation more clearly. I told them about the $50 million crisis, about Jake working 18-hour days for 3 straight weeks, about finding him asleep in his dinner and passed out on bathroom floors. I described how he had pushed himself to the absolute limit to solve a problem that wasn't even his fault, and how his boss had finally given the team time off to recover. "He literally saved his company from bankruptcy," I said, my voice getting slightly stronger. "The least I can do is let him sleep as long as his body needs to recover." But my mother wasn't budging. She shook her head with that stubborn expression I knew so well, the same one she had worn when she insisted I take piano lessons as a child even though I wanted to play soccer, or when she tried to convince me to major in something more practical than the communications degree I eventually earned. "That's all well and good, Sarah, but you're 6 months pregnant," she said, standing up and smoothing down her skirt. "You shouldn't be managing everything on your own while your husband sleeps the day away. What kind of message does that send? What kind of example is that for your future child?" I felt heat rising in my cheeks. "Mom, Jake has been nothing but supportive throughout my entire pregnancy. For 3 weeks, he sacrificed his health and sleep for our family's financial security. One day of proper rest isn't going to hurt anyone." "One day," my father interjected. "Sarah, this could become a habit. Men need structure and expectations, or they start taking advantage." I stared at my father in disbelief. Jake taking advantage? This was the same man who had spent 3 weeks working himself into the ground, who had been so exhausted he could barely function, but who still managed to ask about my day and make sure I had everything I needed every single night when he came home. You're both being completely unreasonable, I said, standing up myself now. Jake is not taking advantage of anything. He's recovering from 3 weeks of extreme stress and exhaustion. My mother's expression hardened. Sarah, I raised 3 children and I know what I'm talking about. Your father never slept past 8 in the morning, not once in our entire marriage, even on weekends. That's what responsible husbands do. Times are different now, Mom, I said, trying one more time to make her understand. Jake's job isn't a traditional 9 to 5. Sometimes he works long hours and sometimes he gets time to recover. That's how modern careers work. But I could see in her face that she wasn't listening anymore. She had made up her mind, and nothing I said was going to change it. This was classic Linda behavior. Once she decided something was wrong, she became absolutely determined to fix it, whether the people involved wanted her help or not. Well, if you won't wake him up, then I will, she announced, taking a step toward the staircase that led to our bedroom. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the pregnancy hormones, or maybe it was 3 weeks of watching my husband sacrifice everything for our family, only to have my own mother dismiss his efforts as laziness. But suddenly, I wasn't the polite, accommodating daughter who usually gave in to keep the peace. I moved quickly, positioning myself between my mother and the stairs. No, you absolutely will not. My mother stopped short, clearly surprised by the firmness in my voice. Sarah, don't be ridiculous. I'm just going to have a little chat with him, let him know that you need him to be more present. Mom, I'm serious, you are not going upstairs. You are not waking up my husband. He needs this sleep, and I will not let anyone disturb him. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in our hallway. My mother and I stood there facing each other, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to decide whether to push past me or try a different approach. Sarah Elizabeth, she said, using my full name the way she had when I was in trouble as a child. I am your mother, and I am only trying to help. You're being emotional and irrational, which is understandable given your condition, but you need to think about what's best for your family. What's best for my family, I said, my voice getting stronger with each word, is for my husband to get the rest he desperately needs after working himself nearly to death for 3 weeks straight. What's best for my family is for people to respect our decisions and our boundaries. My father tried to intervene. Now, girls, let's all calm down. Sarah, your mother is just concerned about your well-being. Maybe we could compromise, just wake Jacob long enough to say hello, and then he can go back to sleep. I turned to look at my father, and I could see that he genuinely thought he was being helpful, but they still didn't understand. This wasn't about saying hello or being polite. This was about respecting my husband's need to recover from an ordeal that had pushed him to his absolute limits. Dad, with all due respect, there is no compromise here. Jake is sleeping, he needs to sleep, and he will continue sleeping until his body tells him it's time to wake up. That's final. My mother's face was getting red now, the way it always did when she wasn't getting her way. Sarah, you're being completely unreasonable. We're your parents and we're only trying to help. If you can't see that, then maybe we need to have a serious conversation about your judgment right now. That comment hit me like a slap. My judgment? I was protecting my husband, supporting his recovery, and setting healthy boundaries. If anything, my judgment had never been clearer. My judgment is fine, Mom. What's not fine is you thinking you have the right to wake up my husband in my house against my explicit wishes. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. We stood there in a standoff, 3 adults who loved each other but couldn't seem to find common ground. I could see the hurt and confusion in my parents' faces, but I could also see the stubborn determination that I had inherited from both of them. The silence stretched between us like a taut rubber band, ready to snap at any moment. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, each second marking another moment of this ridiculous standoff. My mother stood there with her arms crossed, her face flushed with frustration and disbelief. My father looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, clearly wishing he was anywhere else but in the middle of this family drama. Sarah, my mother said finally, her voice taking on that dangerously calm tone that I remembered from my teenage years. I think you're letting your emotions get the better of you. Pregnancy hormones can make women very irrational, and I think that's what's happening here. I felt my jaw clench. The pregnancy hormone excuse. Every time a woman stands up for herself or makes a decision that someone else doesn't like, it gets blamed on hormones. I had heard it at work, from strangers, and now from my own mother. This has nothing to do with pregnancy hormones, Mom. This has to do with respect and common sense. Jake has been working 18-hour days for 3 weeks straight. He has earned the right to sleep in on his first day off. But Sarah, my father interjected, trying to play peacemaker, we're just concerned about you. You're 6 months pregnant, and if Jake is sleeping all day, who's taking care of you? What if you need something heavy lifted? What if you have a medical emergency? I took a deep breath, trying to summon the patience I was rapidly losing. Dad, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly fine. I've been taking care of myself for the past 3 weeks while Jake was working those impossible hours. One morning of him sleeping in isn't going to put me in danger. My mother shook her head vigorously. That's exactly the problem, Sarah. You've been taking care of yourself for 3 weeks, which means Jake hasn't been fulfilling his responsibilities as a husband. Now that he's home, he should be making up for lost time, not sleeping until all hours of the day. I stared at her in amazement. How could she take Jake's incredible sacrifice and twist it into some kind of failure on his part? This was the same man who had called me every single day during those 3 weeks, even when he was barely coherent from exhaustion, just to check if I needed anything. The same man who had arranged for grocery delivery when he couldn't get home to go shopping with me. The same man who had worked himself to the bone to protect our family's financial future. Mom, Jake has been more than fulfilling his responsibilities. He worked himself nearly to death to make sure we didn't lose our health insurance or his job. The fact that he's finally getting some rest doesn't make him a bad husband. But I could see that my words weren't getting through. My mother had that stubborn set to her jaw that meant she had made up her mind, and nothing was going to change it. It was the same expression she had worn when she insisted that my childhood bedroom walls should be pink instead of the blue I wanted, or when she tried to convince me not to marry Jake because we were too young at 24. Well, if you won't be reasonable about this, my mother said, taking another step toward the staircase, then I'll just have to handle it myself. Jake needs to know that sleeping all day isn't acceptable behavior for a married man with a pregnant wife. That's when I realized that this wasn't really about Jake's sleep schedule at all. This was about control. My mother had always had very specific ideas about how marriages should work, how households should be run, and what constituted proper behavior. She had raised her children with rigid schedules and clear expectations, and she couldn't understand or accept that Jake and I had a different way of doing things. I stepped directly in front of her, blocking her path to the stairs completely. Mom, I'm asking you one more time, please do not wake up my husband. Sarah, move out of my way, she said, her voice getting sharper. I'm going to go upstairs and have a conversation with Jake about being more considerate of his pregnant wife's needs. No, you're not. The words came out stronger and more definitive than I had intended, but I didn't regret them. I could feel something shifting inside me, like a door closing on the part of me that had always tried to keep the peace, always tried to avoid conflict with my parents. My mother's eyes widened in surprise. Excuse me. I said no, you are not going upstairs. You are not waking up my husband. This is my house, Jake is my husband, and I am making the decision that he needs to sleep. Sarah Elizabeth, my mother said again, her voice rising, I cannot believe the way you're speaking to me. I am your mother, and I am only trying to help you in your marriage. If you really want to help my marriage, I said, standing my ground, then you'll respect the decisions that Jake and I make together. You'll trust that we know what's best for our own family. My father tried again to mediate. Sarah, honey, maybe we're all getting a little too worked up here. Why don't we sit down and talk about this calmly? But my mother wasn't interested in sitting down or talking calmly. She was determined to get her way, just like she always had been. Robert, don't you start taking her side. Sarah is being completely unreasonable, and someone needs to talk sense into that husband of hers. There is no sense to be talked into him, I said, my voice getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. Jake doesn't need anyone to talk sense into him. He needs sleep, he needs rest, he needs recovery time after the most stressful 3 weeks of his career. What he needs, my mother said firmly, is to understand his priorities. His wife and unborn child should come before his own comfort. That comment hit me like a physical blow. Jake's own comfort? This woman had completely missed the point of everything I had tried to explain to her. Jake hadn't been working those impossible hours for his own comfort. He had been sacrificing his health, his sleep, and his sanity for our family's security. Jake's priorities are exactly where they should be, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. He spent 3 weeks putting our family's financial security above his own well-being. He worked himself to exhaustion to make sure we didn't lose his job or our health insurance. If you can't see that, then I don't know what else to say to you. My mother straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin in that way that meant she was preparing for battle. What I can see is a young woman who is letting her husband sleep all day while she's 6 months pregnant and probably needs help around the house. What I can see is a marriage that needs some guidance from people who know what they're talking about. And what I can see, I said, matching her posture and her tone, is 2 people who are trying to interfere in a marriage that doesn't need their interference. Jake and I are adults. We've been married for 5 years. We can handle our own decisions. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. It felt final. My mother and I stared at each other across what felt like an enormous chasm, and I realized that this moment was about much more than whether Jake should be allowed to sleep late on a Saturday morning. This was about boundaries. This was about respect. This was about my right to make decisions for my own family without having to justify them to anyone else, even my own parents. Fine, my mother said finally, her voice cold and clipped. If that's how you feel, then I guess we know where we stand. I guess we do, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fact that my heart was pounding. She turned to my father. Robert, get your coat, we're leaving. My father looked genuinely confused and distressed as he watched this confrontation escalate beyond anything he had expected when they decided to drop by for their usual Saturday visit. Linda, maybe we should. No, Robert, my mother interrupted, her voice sharp with hurt and anger. If Sarah wants to choose her husband's sleep schedule over her own parents' concern for her well-being, then that's her choice. But we don't have to stay here and be treated with such disrespect. I felt a stab of guilt at those words. The last thing I had wanted was to hurt my parents or make them feel unwelcome in my home. These were the people who had raised me, loved me, supported me through college, and celebrated with tears of joy when Jake and I got engaged. They were going to be my child's grandparents, and the thought of damaging that relationship made my heart ache. But then I thought about Jake upstairs, finally getting the deep, restorative sleep his body desperately needed after 3 weeks of running on empty. I thought about how he had pushed himself to the absolute limit, not for his own benefit, but for our family's future. I thought about the relief and exhaustion in his face when he had told me that the crisis was finally over. Mom, I said, my voice softer now but still firm, I'm not choosing Jake's sleep over your concern. I'm choosing to respect my husband's needs and to make decisions based on what's actually happening in our lives, not on what you think should be happening. My mother was gathering her purse and coat, her movements sharp and angry. What I think should be happening is that a pregnant woman should be able to count on her husband to be available during the day, not sleeping until all hours like some kind of teenager. What's actually happening, I said, following her toward the front door, is that my husband worked himself nearly to death for 3 weeks to protect our family's financial security, and now he's getting the first real rest he's had in almost a month. My father paused in putting on his jacket. Sarah, we really are just worried about you. Your mother and I, we love you both, and we want to make sure you're being taken care of. I could hear the genuine concern in his voice, and it made this whole situation even more heartbreaking. Dad, I know you love us, and I love you too, but Jake does take care of me. He has been taking care of me, even while working those impossible hours. Letting him sleep isn't a sign that he's neglecting me. It's a sign that I care about his health and well-being. My mother turned back to face me, her hand on the doorknob. Sarah, I hope you realize what you're doing. You're choosing to kick your own parents out of your house rather than simply wake up your husband to say hello. What kind of daughter does that? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with hurt and accusation. What kind of daughter was I? Was I being unreasonable? Was I overreacting to what my parents saw as a simple request? But then I remembered something Jake had said to me just a few months ago when we were having dinner and talking about boundaries with family. He had told me how proud he was of the way I had started standing up for myself more, how he loved seeing me become more confident in expressing my needs and opinions. I'm the kind of daughter, I said quietly, who protects her family. I'm the kind of daughter who makes decisions based on love and respect, not on other people's expectations. And I'm the kind of daughter who will always choose to do what's right for her husband and her marriage, even when it's difficult. My mother's face crumpled slightly, and for a moment I saw past her anger to the hurt underneath. Sarah, we're your family too. You are, I agreed, and I meant it completely. You're my family, and I love you both so much. But Jake is my chosen family. He's my partner, and soon he'll be the father of my child. When I made the decision to marry him, I made a commitment to put our relationship first, to protect and support him the way he protects and supports me. Even if it means disrespecting your parents? My father asked, and I could hear the pain in his voice. I'm not trying to disrespect you, I said, and I felt tears starting to well up in my eyes. I'm trying to respect my husband. I'm trying to do what's right for my family. Jake isn't sleeping late because he's lazy or irresponsible. He's sleeping because he's exhausted from working himself to the bone for 3 weeks straight. My mother opened the front door, and I felt the cool afternoon air rush into the house. Well, Sarah, I hope you're happy with your choice. I hope Jake appreciates what you've sacrificed for his comfort. Mom, please don't leave like this, I said, the tears flowing freely now. I don't want to fight with you. Then wake up your husband, she said simply, and there it was. The ultimatum I had been dreading. Choose between keeping the peace with my parents and protecting my husband's well-being. Choose between avoiding conflict and standing up for what I believed was right. I can't do that, I whispered. I won't do that. My mother nodded once, sharply. Then I guess we have nothing more to say to each other today. They walked out and I closed the door behind them with shaking hands. I stood in my empty living room listening to their car start up and drive away and wondered if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing with text messages. My Aunt Carol, your mother called me crying. How could you kick your own parents out of your house? My cousin Jennifer, Sarah, your mom is really upset. Maybe you should apologize. My brother Michael, Dad says you wouldn't let them wake up Jake. That's pretty messed up, sis. Each message felt like a small stab to my heart. My family was tight-knit, and news traveled fast among the aunts, uncles, and cousins who made up our extended clan. By evening, I had received messages from nearly every family member, all of them expressing various degrees of disappointment, confusion, and criticism. Some of them were gentler than others. My sister Emma texted, I don't know the whole story, but I'm sure you had your reasons. Love you. But most of them seemed to side with my parents, viewing my actions as unnecessarily harsh and disrespectful. Around 6 o'clock, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jake appeared in the kitchen, looking more rested than I had seen him in weeks. His hair was messy from sleep, but his eyes were clear and bright, and the terrible exhaustion that had been etched into his features was finally starting to fade. Hey, beautiful, he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind and kissing the top of my head. How was your day? I leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his solid warmth. It was complicated. I told him everything, about my parents' visit, about the confrontation, about the text messages from family members. Jake listened without interrupting, his arms tightening around me as the story progressed. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned me around to face him, his hands gentle on my shoulders. Sarah, he said, his voice serious but warm, what you did today was incredible. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself. You stood up for our marriage and our decisions even when it was difficult and painful. But my family thinks I'm wrong, I said, fresh tears threatening to spill over. They think I overreacted. Your family doesn't understand what the last 3 weeks have been like for us, Jake said firmly. They don't understand that you've been carrying the entire household on your own while also dealing with pregnancy. They don't understand that I was literally falling apart from exhaustion. He cupped my face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had started to fall. What you did today showed me exactly what kind of partner you are, what kind of mother you're going to be. You put our family first, even when it was hard, even when it cost you something. I just felt like I had to protect your sleep, I whispered. You needed it so badly. I did need it, Jake agreed. But more than that, I needed to know that you had my back. I needed to know that when things got difficult, you would stand with me. Today, you proved that beyond any doubt. We stood there in our kitchen, holding each other as the evening light faded outside our windows. I still felt sad about the conflict with my parents, and I knew it would take time to repair the hurt feelings on both sides. But I also felt something else, a deep sense of certainty that I had made the right choice. Jake and I were a team. We were building a life together, creating a family together, facing challenges together. Sometimes that meant making decisions that other people didn't understand or approve of. Sometimes it meant standing up for each other even when it was uncomfortable or painful. But that's what marriage was about, wasn't it? Choosing each other, supporting each other, protecting each other. Not just when it was easy, but especially when it was hard. As I write this now, several days later, I'm still receiving mixed messages from family members. Some have come around after I explained the situation more fully. Others still think I overreacted. My parents and I haven't spoken since that day, though I'm hopeful we'll find a way to work through this. But I don't regret my decision. I protected my husband when he needed protection. I stood up for our marriage when it needed defending. I drew boundaries that needed to be drawn. And Jake, he spent the next 4 days truly resting and recovering. We took long walks together, cooked meals together, and prepared for our baby's arrival together. He was more present and attentive than he had been in weeks, not because I had demanded it or because my mother had insisted on it, but because he was finally well rested enough to be his true self again. That's what I was fighting for that day. Not just Jake's right to sleep, but his right to recover, to heal, to be the partner and father our growing family needs him to be. I think that's worth standing up for, even when the whole family thinks you're wrong.